Hello everyone, I'm Tenzin Zomba, and welcome to Tibet This Week, a weekly feature in English that tells you about this week's news on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and Central Tibetan Administration. Let us look at the headlines first. Our survival depends on the well-being of community, says His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Speaker Jungney condoles demise of former Assam Chief Minister Sri Gogoi. Honorary Representative Telo Rinpoche visits eastern regions of Russia. High time for China to recognize and work towards redressal of gender-based violence, says CTA's Women Empowerment Desk. Office of Tibet DC partakes in 15th Interfaith Leadership Conference. Office of Tibet Geneva rejects China's false claim to United Nations. Office of Tibet Geneva testifies on conditions of Tibetan political prisoners under Chinese rule. United Nations Committee raises concern over China's destruction of Tibetan language. Increased crackdown on Tibetans by China in the last decade, says Shawn Steil. His Holiness the Dalai Lama once again emphasized on importance of looking after one's community as one of the best ways for human survival.
Now some scientists also say we are social animals. So biologically, all social animal have the sense of community. So that means, you see, concern of your own community. Because your survival entirely depends on the community. Without a community, one single individual human being cannot survive. Not only a human being, but also, you see, animals or birds.
On Wednesday this week, His Holiness took part in a discussion with members of the Einstein Forum, a foundation in the state of Brandenburg, Germany, that serves as an open laboratory of the mind. During the discussion on the central theme of Buddhism, science, and compassion, His Holiness touched on topics such as warm-heartedness, compassion, and self-discipline, the common message of all major religious traditions. Speaker of the 16th Tibetan Parliament in exile, Pema Jungney, offered his heartfelt condolences to Sri Gaurav Gogoi, Lok Sabha member of the Parliament, on the demise of his father, late Tarun Gogoi, former Chief Minister of Assam. Expressing his deep sadness, the speaker wrote that the late Chief Minister Gogoi was a steadfast supporter of Tibetan cause and who welcomed and supported the Tibetans during the early exile days. A delegation led by the Honorary Representative of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in Russia, Mongolia, and the CIS countries, Telo Rinpoche visited the Buryat State University in Ulan-Ude, the capital of Buryat Republic, and the Buddhist University Dashchegurling in Ivolginsky Datsang, as well as the Center for the Oriental Manuscripts and Xylographs of the Institute of Mongolian Studies, Buddhology, and Tibetology of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences last Tuesday. Telo Rinpoche also met with the rector Geshe Dembrial at the Buddhist University at Dashchegurling, Ivolginsky Datsang, to discuss issues of Buddhist education. Rinpoche made his first visit to Ajinsky Buryat district of the Trans-Baikal territory, where he paid a visit to two historical monasteries of the Trans-Baikal territory, Ajinsky and Sugolsky, as well as the Ajinsky Buddhist Academy. Telo Rinpoche took part in the solemn ceremony of enthronement of the 9th Kampa Lama of Republic of Tuva. During his visit to the far eastern regions of the country, Honorary Representative also met with Tibet support groups, Tibetan communities, government officials, and NGOs. As the case of Lamo's death after her ex-husband burned her alive drew attention of many on the issues of intimate partner violence, the Women Empowerment Desk of Central Tibetan Administration called on the Chinese authorities to recognize the prevalence of domestic violence and work towards prevention, prohibition, and redressal of gender-based violence. Sichuan County Police has reportedly refused to take action when Lamo, a young Tibetan woman from Ngaba in Tibet, tried to file complaints against her ex-husband, a Chinese national named Tang, for domestic violence. Her repeated pleas for protection were ignored each time. In mid-September, Lamo's ex-husband Tang broke into her house armed with knife and petrol and set her on fire while she was streaming a live video on a Chinese video application. All of this happened while some 300 followers of Lama were watching her live video. The 15th Interfaith Leadership Conference of Citizen Power Initiative was held virtually on last Wednesday with global participants and speakers. The experts took over the screen and shared their insights on various topics of interest such as China's relationship with Canada, India, Japan, European Union and United Kingdom. Representatives of the victimized ethnic groups also presented major issues that they are facing. Dr. Jungney started the initiative under the guidance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama more than a decade ago. Representative Ngotup Tsering of Office of Tibet, Washington, D.C. gave opening remarks for the conference and congratulated Dr. Jungney and his colleagues for their steadfast commitment and leadership. Senator Marsha Blackburn, Congressman Chris Smith, and Congressman Ted Yoho also shared their greetings to the conference. The Tibet Bureau Geneva denounced the contemptuous talks against one of the most revered spiritual leaders of the world and Nobel Peace Laureate, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, by the Chinese government. In a recent communication to the United Nations independent experts, the Chinese government has falsely claimed that it established the religious status and titles of the lineage of the living Buddhas and the institutions of the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lamas. The Chinese government submitted the communication as a response to the joint allegation letter issued by 5 UN independent experts on 2 June 2020, wherein the UN experts had demanded information on the 11th Panchen Lama, Geneva, as well as raised concerns about China's interference in the religious practices and traditions of the Tibetans, especially the reincarnation of the Tibetan living Buddhas. The Tibet Bureau Geneva further mentioned that atheist Chinese Communist Party's two-pronged strategy of denouncing His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the one hand and claiming ownership of the institution of the Dalai Lamas on the other hand needs to be exposed for its expansionist agenda. The Tibet Bureau Geneva staff Telo, Special Appointee for Human Rights, testified on the deplorable conditions of the Tibetan political prisoners under Chinese rule at a web conference organized in the Senate building of the Italian Republic on Monday this week. Telo highlighted the cases of Panchen Lama, Geneva, Tashi Wangchu, Anya Sengdra, and also spoke about the custodial deaths like Tulku Delek, as well as the recent case of 36-year-old Lama, who died in the hospital due to torture in custody. The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has raised concerns about the Chinese government replacing Tibetans with Chinese language as the medium of instruction in schools and persecution of the Tibetan language rights advocates in its recent communication to the Chinese government dated 24th of November 2020. The Tibet Bureau Geneva welcomes the communication of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination to China, expressing concerns on the gradual systematic destruction of Tibetan language and persecution of Tibetan language rights advocates, as well as continued restriction on Tibetans to travel and apply for passports. In his testimony, the Executive Director, Greater China Policy and Coordination, Global Affairs Canada, Shawn Steil, said Chinese government has increased crackdowns on Tibetan people in the last decade. Describing the difficulty of access to Tibet, Shawn Steil said the access to Tibet remains strictly controlled by the Chinese government, and on rare occasions when official visits are allowed, they are highly scripted.
Access to Tibet remains strictly controlled by the Chinese government, and on rare occasions when official visits are allowed, they are highly scripted. In recent years, Tibet's central government has made it more difficult for diplomats, journalists, and foreigners overall to visit. A travel permit and an invitation is necessary.
The testimony also covered a wide range of topics, including Canada's position on the status of Tibet, middle way approach, and the Central Tibetan Administration, and specific issues such as forced labor and resettlement of Tibetan nomads, as Mr. Steil was asked questions by several members of the committee, including members of the Parliament, John Williamson, Peter Frederick Garnet Genius, and Arif Virani. The virtual testimony took place on 17th November as a part of an ongoing study of China-related issues by the Parliamentary Committee on Canada-China Relations. That is all for now. See you next week.